Hello and welcome back to The Stories That Brought You Here, a podcast dedicated to the stories of the people living in and around the Salish Sea. I'm your host, Chris Wakalek, and it's my pleasure to get to sit down in conversation to hear the stories that brought people to this magical part of the world we live in, and also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. This episode you're about to listen to is part of a special series I'm doing called Welcome Home. As you know, the world has changed a lot in the last 2.5 years, and so has the little island I live on called Pender. Many people have decided to make a big change in their lives and move to this little island, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to get to meet some of them. This time around, I'm going to be speaking with Johnny Cunningham. In the spring of 2020, Johnny was living in Victoria and working as a cook in the kitchen for a prestigious golf club in Victoria. He was also in the beginning of a new relationship with a woman on Pender Island at that time. Johnny will tell the story about how he decided to move over here during that time and make a go at living on Pender, and how things have been ever since. He'll also talk about his time growing up with a large family in Ontario, his pure passion for cooking at home and also at the workplace, and also he's going to share stories about his love of photography and the lessons he's learned from his time in nature waiting to take that perfect picture. All that and more that I think you're going to enjoy in a great interview with Johnny. Before we get rolling, I want to let you know that this podcast train is going to keep going. There's lots of episodes coming out. If you're new to this, welcome. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. Lots of different ways to stay updated to new episodes. You can subscribe to Podbean. You can join the Facebook page. I have a Twitter account, and I am also on YouTube now. So any one of those ways you can keep up to date with new episodes. And I'd also like to mention that this episode is sponsored by the Tree and Transformation Calendar, made by my lovely wife, Geneva. For the past number of years, she's been creating beautiful calendars featuring original works of art. And for 2023, she's created a colorful, beautiful calendar with each month representing a different tree. The calendars come on individual pieces of paper, so you can hang 1 month at a time, or 12 on a wall, as some people have, or 3 on your refrigerator like we do at home. So purchase of these calendars is not just going to help you know what day it is every day next year. It's also going to help contribute to keeping this podcast rolling along. I put a lot of time into making these interviews sounding great, and I love doing them, but they do take quite a lot of time. I've been trying to figure out a way to help offset the costs of making this podcast, and I came up with this idea to help support my wife sell calendars, which in turn helps me and helps this podcast. So if you like what I do here and you want to help support this, you can buy a calendar or you can buy more than one. Please go to genevajacobsart.com, and there you can find the calendars for sale. You'll find a link for that as well in the show notes. Just click on that and it should send you to the page where you can purchase the calendars, which again are totally beautiful, and you can see the images of the calendars there. All right, thanks very much for listening to that. So first a little bit of music, and then my interview with Johnny Cunningham. So what was your introduction to the Gulf Islands, Johnny?
The first time I ever saw the Gulf Islands was Salt Spring with my best friend, Tim, which is a good story that we should probably talk about. But anyway, he's like, hey, we're going camping. We'd like you to come. We're going to Salt Spring. I can't remember the name of the camping grounds we stayed at. It blew me away how hippie-ish Salt Spring was from like a small town Ontario guy. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it was judging everybody. There was a lot of signs like pro bikes, a lot of like, if you don't like bikes, well, this isn't the island for you to be on. And anyway, we stayed at this beautiful campground. Everything is colored blue, purple-ish. And we get there, we'd already paid beforehand. And we get there at the main building and nobody's there, but there's a note and it says, if you're here for your campsite, check the chart on the wall. And if you haven't paid, just leave it in this basket. And here's some change. And nobody's there.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And I'm like, it's really early in the morning and I'm looking at the coffee and then I see another sign, coffee, $1.50. here's some change. Just leave it. And there's nobody. So I'm like, I don't have a coffee. I don't know how old this is, but like I make my own coffee. That way we find our site. We were there for the weekend, nice hot weekend in August. And that was my first greeting to Gulf Islands.
Okay. And what year was that in roughly?
That was 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So very recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at the time you were living in?
I was living in Victoria and working I was probably 10 years or so, 11 years living in Victoria at the time.
Okay.
And loved everything about Victoria, loved everything about the Gulf Island. When I experienced that, it was really, really wicked.
Okay. Well, let's get into what you were doing in Victoria at the time, because I know, but if you want to let the listeners know, but what was going on there?
Well, I was working first of all, I was working in the kitchen in Toronto when it came up. It was hard in Toronto. There was a lot of jobs, but there's just a lot of terrible jobs. It's hard to find a good job. I'm speaking personal. So it was hard for me to find a good job. A lot of bad ones out there. Anyway, so when I moved here to Victoria, I sent out some resumes. I had 7 offers on the first day.
Wow.
And I started haggling with all of them. I'm like, okay, listen, like, money's tight. So like, what are you prepared to pay? And I literally went to the highest bidder. Now, that wasn't my only thing, but I was like, I'm not going to be pushed around anymore. But like, it's a corrupt industry and there's all sorts of different people that you work for. So, you live and learn is what I'm getting at. So that was first and foremost. Then obviously the people that you're working with, the aura of the place. So I worked at, the place I chose was the Victoria Golf Club, which is a private golf club, very prestigious. They're very, very proud about their golfing there. Apparently it was, when I was working there, at best it was ranked number 12 in Canada. And they actually have people that go around and they experience all the golf. This is a links course. So they experience all the links courses all throughout Canada, and then they rate them. And so we were rated fairly high. So it was good. I was the events coordinator, and my job was there were a lot of events there. And they'd be anywhere from 20 people or 10 people to as many as we've done 300. And on the last year, it was only me doing those events. It was pretty crazy. When I started, there was 4, and then it dwindled down to 3, 2, and then finally just me. But it was a well-oiled machine. A lot of work, a lot of organizing skills required, and you just know what needs to be done, write everything down, get your times right. What's going to take the longest to cook, what's going to be the fastest to cook, and you go from there.
How long did it take for you to get up to speed with all that? Because the cooking that you were doing before in Ontario.
Nothing like that, yeah. Yeah, so probably most of a year, just learning how to cook in that style. I had to learn a lot there. I realized how green I was. What they saw in me and what they liked in me, and I guess this is my advantage being a kitchen guy, is I have so much front of house experience. So where a lot of the kitchen workers want to hide and stay away from all the clientele, I thrive on that. I like meeting them all, and I have no problem talking with people I've never met before, and apparently with very wealthy people that I've never met before either. And the chef liked that. And so he'd put me front and center out there. So that was my job the whole time I was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you really enjoy it?
Really enjoyed it. Yeah, really did. COVID hit and then it was over.
Yeah, of course. Not many events being scheduled.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what happened when COVID hit? And because, like everybody else, things shut down dramatically. But what happened for you specifically?
The original chef left for another job. It was a one-man job at that point, is when we had no chef. Mm-hmm. I'd always be working with the chef for this function. functions. And a new chef came on, and I just did not get along with this guy. He's just not a nice man. And when COVID hit, no warning, I found out from a bartender that we were going to be closing in a week's time or less. And so I started asking a lot of questions, found out that it was legit. And I'm like, what happens? And he's like, don't worry, you're getting laid off. You know, the HR is going to take care of all the paperwork and everything, but yeah, we're putting you on EI right away. They're going to, because of COVID, the government is pushing this. So I had a lot of help, as he said, from HR. And Chris, that went on for most of a year, just not knowing what my future was with the company. They were still open, different. It was different, obviously run completely different. But it was just like, call us in 2 weeks. And I'd call in 2 weeks and then not get any straight answers. And eventually the chef just said, yeah, we've chosen a different direction, and you're not on the schedule anymore. You're not working with it. I'm like, so you're firing me? It's like, well, you want to look at it like that? I'm like, I look at it like I either quit or I'm being fired. I'm not quitting. So are you firing me? And he's like, well, I guess you're being fired then. I went, okay, well, then one paycheck isn't going to do it. Let's get a severance package. And he didn't do that. I had to go to HR. It was a big runaround, but I got all the money that was owed to me. It was a really nasty way to leave what was a good job up to that point.
No, that sounds like that sucks. Like,
yeah,
that's really...
It did, but it paved the way during my time. The last 2 years of Victoria, I met a wonderful woman, Matilda, online. So it kind of gave me the time required to spend with her. So it was a blessing and it was a curse at the same time. So
yeah. Well, let's talk about how that transition happened for you. So you met Matilda, and she was living on Pender, but maybe if you want to pick up the story about how everything unfolded after things ended with your job.
Yeah. So while I was still working there and COVID wasn't it wasn't, known, I had met Matilda online and started communicating really, really well with her and back and forth. And it was moving pretty fast. And then we I think we met each other within the first 2 weeks of communication. So yeah, it was fairly fast. And then when COVID hit, we just kept getting more and more, grounded in the relationship. And COVID kept us apart more than we wanted to. It was pretty hard. There was a stretch of 6 months that I remember doing, still living in Victoria. I'd come to Pender Island when I could to visit her. But yeah, there was a long stretch because we were doing it right. Like there was a lot of people cheating. That wasn't us. We were following the guidelines and the rules set out by our government, and it was tough. And anyway, that finally opened up they lifted the restrictions, but another wave was on the works, and we could all see this coming. And I thought, got to make the move, or I didn't want to go through another wave, another 6 months of not being with her. So made a few phone calls and got a job at Joe's place, and was just happy to have a job at the time. And through the help of Joe, it wasn't my style of cooking, but he was a very, very generous, very nice person. It was good start to introduce me to people. He got me the cabin that I was living at the time, and it was because of him that I was able to stay on the island.
So, okay, you move over here because you want to be closer to the woman that you started dating, who is Matilda.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that's not going to be happening because of this new wave of restrictions that's going to be
That's right.
more than likely coming into place. So you make the move over, and then Joe helps you out finding a place and you're working for him. And how did that first year go for you being on Pender here?
It was great. There was a time where I didn't have a place, and I kept my apartment in Victoria until I could get a place permanently on Pender. And there was a time where I was like, I couldn't rely, or I didn't want to be the guy who's just like crashing on Matilda's all the time. And she, and like another mouth to feed and whatever. And I gave myself to this, I don't know what the date was, but it was a weekend. And I let Joe know, like, listen, can't find any place to live on Pender. And if I don't find it by this day, I got to move back to Victoria. I want to stay here, but, it's all based on whether or not I can find a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, we'll get you a place to live. Don't worry about that. Here's a schedule. He was like that. And
he needed you.
Yeah. And it was like the day before or 2 days before the end. And I'm like, Joe, like, I got to go on this day. He's like, okay, let me make a few calls. And he got me the place.
It was a very small cabin you were living in when you
very
first...
small cabin. Yeah.
You just showed me before we started the interview with the approximate size of it, and
that's right.
It was like maybe the size of 8 bathtubs or something. It was
it's
very
it was
small.
And it was quaint, and it was comfortable, and it was pretty, and I was comfortable there, except when there's no power. I had no stove, so no oven for that matter. So I had a Instant Pot, making all my meals with an Instant Pot. That was interesting. You had to be more creative cooking, which always inspires me to be more and more creative. But one pot cooks. It's tough.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask as well too. So, have you ever lived in a rural situation like this previous to living on Pender?
In Ontario, yes. I'm a small town guy, but it's a town called Port Dover. It's right on the shore of Lake Erie, and it's a tourist town. And so, yeah, it's quite rural, but in the summer, it's, I don't know, like the little brother of Niagara Falls. It's like it's on a very small scale of Niagara Falls, but it's number of people. A lot of people come to Port Dover in the summertime. Okay. It's very, very popular. The beach is beautiful, long sandy beach, deep sandy beach, and the water's awesome. Like it's very, very comfortable to swim in. No offense to the water here, but it's freezing. But beautiful beaches here too, just different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, there is a interesting story that brought me here, if I may tell that one.
Please.
From Ontario. So I had a girlfriend at the time. She had come out to BC with her mother. And as what usually happens, people will come to BC for the first time and they'll fall in love with it and they want to move here. Yeah. And that was certainly no exception to her. And so she put down to me that this is what I want to do. I'd like you to come. What do you think? And I'm like, wow. I don't know. I'm like pretty grounded in Ontario, got a big family, love my family, and I wouldn't be spending a lot of time with my family anymore. Do I want to do this? And I eventually decided, yeah, I do. And it wasn't a great relationship that I was in. The opportunity was interesting. The work was a great surprise to me. As I said, I had a lot of bad jobs in Toronto, and that was not my experience in Victoria. So that was great. But the great thing that happened was I lived in Ottawa for like 12 years, and I had an Ottawa friend, just an amazing group of friends that I developed there. And one of them reached out to me and said, "Hey, Johnny, I hear you've moved to Victoria. Is this true?" And I went, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, have you gotten a hold of Tim? Tim's living in Victoria." And I went, "Really, Tim? I haven't." And it's been at the time, 26 years since I've seen Tim.
Who's Tim?
He was a good friend of mine in Ottawa.
Okay.
We had a lot of great times together, like just amazing times that we had. And so I called him up and he's like, Johnny Cunningham, I haven't heard from you for so long. And I'm like, yeah, we lost track. He was a man of the world. He'd travel all the time. I'd go to hang out with Tim and he's like, oh, he's not here. He's in South America. He's in Peru or whatever. And, or if he wasn't there, he'd be in Africa. He was all over the place. He was just always wanted to travel. And so I found myself missing him a lot. And then lo and behold, he's like, well, let's meet. And he's living like literally 2 blocks away from where I was living. It was crazy. And we basically just reconnected our friendship where it left off, and just, yeah. And he's been my best friend since. He's awesome.
Right on.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference, moving to a new place and then having like built-in, like already made friend like that, right?
Absolutely.
I actually just wanted to ask as well too, because you mentioned you have a big family in Ontario, and maybe you could tell us about your family in Ontario.
Yeah. My dad's family is a big one. They moved from Ireland and my dad was 18 at the time. He's the oldest of siblings of 13. So imagine that. You're the oldest of 13. They moved to Campbellford, Ontario. And going to fast forward, because I don't know a lot of the story. I was just a young little kid, but Grandpa died when I was 7, and then Grandma died soon after that. It was just like a will to live kind of deal. She loved him so much, didn't want to live without him. And, body's a really amazing thing when you can have say over, if you want to continue or if you don't want to continue. She didn't want to continue, and her body listened to her. And so she died maybe a year after. And so my dad became the patriarch, if you will, of the family. And every one of his brothers or sisters stayed at our house at some point.
Wow.
Some for months, some for years, some for days. But it was always like that. And if they had no place to go for Christmas was a big deal in our household, then they would come to our place. And I remember some of the Christmases. My mom and dad lived modestly. They had 3 bedrooms for me and my brother and sister. But that place had way more people than what they should have been able to accommodate. Because there were some Christmases where we had over 30 people. And they were like, literally, there'd be like bedrolls or sleeping bags or something just stretched on a part of the floor somewhere. But you wake up as a kid and you see that mountain of gifts for 30 plus people. It was quite amazing to behold.
I can't imagine the mountain of wrapping paper after that was all done.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we had a lot of garbage bags on the corner of our...
So you got to really know all your aunts and uncles, 12 aunts and uncles on your dad's side. Yeah. If they're
very well. Still do. I mean, they still have people come and go. I had when I was 18, so one of my uncles, Julian, he moved to England at a young age. Very amazing man, wanted to be an actor. Very funny, when I was a kid, he'd be the one to put on Christmas plays. He'd write them and then get his brothers and sisters to star in them, write their roles, and they'd be hilarious. I wouldn't understand it. I was way too young, but judging by the laughter, it was quite good. And I had an opportunity when I was 18 to go to England and stay with him, and I did that. And sadly, he passed away 6 months after I returned. He passed away rather suddenly of a brain aneurysm. And all of my aunts and uncles did a lot of one-on-one with me, and just wanted to know what I did. What fun times did you have with my brother, Julian? And I tell them all I could. I realized how lucky I was. I was the last person to see him in the family. And so telling those stories was an interesting way in which I saw him, because I saw him in a way that they didn't. And it was a way for him to reconnect with family. And it was as important to him as it was me, I think.
Wow. How long were you visiting him there on that trip?
It was a year.
Oh, it was a full year. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I had an open return ticket when I left.
Obviously, in a year, a lot of stories happen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of stories. Yeah.
And
He actually, I should say, he was a general manager of Carvery, which is a pub and restaurant. But only the Carvery, they'd have a chef carving 3 different meats so it was a buffet, but on a grandiose scale and pretty upper class. It was expensive to eat. But yeah, it was, so that was my introduction more or less to the industry at the time.
So that was a super impactful trip in your life, obviously.
Oh yeah, major, big time.
And then brothers and sisters back home in Ontario?
I'm the middle child. My sister is a year older. She's a nurse. She lives in Port Dover still, has 2 wonderful kids. And my brother is 6 years younger than I am. He has his own jiu-jitsu gym in Sarnia. And he was a fierce competitor in jiu-jitsu at the time and won a lot of awards and medals and stuff. And was actually an invite into the UFC. I can't remember what year it was. And he would have fought Carlos Newton had he accepted. He was the champion in his weight class, the welterweight. And Rowan had, I think less than 2 weeks to train for that fight. So he passed it on. It was obviously a big fight, but like those guys in the UFC, they train for a year for one fight that might last 30 seconds,
Sure, yeah.
So he passed that up. He doesn't regret that. But anyway, he's a trainer on a very big scale. He goes to UFC events a lot. He's trained some really prominent Canadians who represent the UFC, and so he's been that's taken him all over the world. And he's liking that. I'm talking more about my brother than my sister. My sister's hilarious. She's the very creative, extremely funny. We just have such a good time when we're together.
It sounds like your family's pretty tight. That's yeah,
very tight family. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. Something else I wanted to talk about while we're doing this as well too is your love of photography. So the first time that we actually got together and talked, which was a New Year's Eve get together, and you told me about your passion for photography, and I know you wanted to share a little bit about that. But let's hear about your number one hobby outside of cooking.
Outside of cooking.
Okay.
Yeah. So, when the woman that I moved up to BC with, that fell through, and I always had the urge to take up photography, and then I did it then, and got myself a camera. I was shooting landscapes, and I was at where was I now? Macaulay Point in Esquimalt, which is a beautiful sanctuary park, and right on the water. It's sunrise. I'm taking some photos of the sunrise, and then I hear psh, 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 and there's like 6 orcas, literally 30 yards off in the water, and I start shooting them. But I'm like so caught up in the moment. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Never seen an orca ever, and shaking, and really, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then, so I shot off as many photos as I could take. And then people were coming out and like, I've lived here for 35 years. I've never seen anything like that before. And I realized, like, it's not just being at the right place at the right time. It's being there. Because it's easy to say, I'll do it tomorrow. But then you're going to miss it, right? If you're there, and I was there. If I could be there every day, I would have. But some days I had to, I had to work, had other commitments or whatever. But yeah, when I saw the orcas, that was it for me. And like, I'm shooting the wrong thing. Landscapes? No, I'm shooting wildlife. And so I got into wildlife, started researching it. I said, you want to start out, I want to be a wildlife photographer, start shooting birds. I didn't have much of an interest in birds, but they're hard to shoot. So I got that. So if you could like get that, that's the making of like every good wildlife photographer will shoot birds.
So why are birds hard to shoot?
They're so fast, so hard to focus on. So it's hard to get, like, it's magical, Chris, when you're teaching yourself how to pan your camera at the same speed that the bird is flying by at. And if you pan it just right, you'll have the bird or part of the bird completely in focus and everything else is blurred out. And it's a magical picture if you can get the lighting right and everything else that is extremely difficult in taking it. It's, you get that. There's something about getting that eye in focus as it's flying by. And I know how difficult that is. When you do it, it's monumental. It's big. But what ends up happening is you come home, you upload all the images on your computer, and I might have 1,000, might have over 1,000, and you're deleting like 900 because it's like not in focus, not in focus, not in focus. You get that one, it's worth it.
Yeah. So going out for, an afternoon just to get one picture is worth it.
Oh, absolutely. That one shot, it's worth 8 hours to me.
Yeah.
Easy. Yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at the experience, right? Because I think that our society sort of goes on quantity more than quality, but
quality.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so you were captivated by the experience with the orcas and wanted to shoot wildlife. So you started with the birds, and then where did that take you?
Well, I'd expecting birds because that's what you're going to see. You're going to see more birds than anything. But what I do, I have a thing where I'm learning this currently in Pender here, but I'll pick out a few spots and I'll look for, the time of the year where the spot is shaded, but the sun is there. So I'm under the shade and I'm kind of hidden, and I'll just park there. I'll stay there all day, or many hours, and just wait for stuff to happen. And it's a matter of not being on your phone, having the camera ready. You've already metered the light, and you're guessing where the bird's gonna fly by, but you want it to fly by in a certain area because the lighting is just right there, and never works that way, but whatever. And but yeah, that's when, that was all this. It was very successful in Victoria, and it's becoming that way slowly here. But I had spots that I scouted out for a long time in Victoria, and that's why I was successful with it. The other thing is the birds have to be comfortable with people, and they're just not on Pender, I find. So, at the farm here, the property, we have a pond, and the ducks, there's several ducks that like going there, some mergansers, and I'll go out and I'll walk really slow. And the first few times, they'd fly away immediately. The moment they saw me, they'd fly away. In Victoria, I could go right up to them. But then they were there the next day, and I did it. They fly away. But after a week, they got used. Now I can walk right up to the shoreline. They're not flying away. So that's pretty cool.
That's super cool. So you would climatize the birds to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and you do that at your nest, if you will, where I'll find a spot at a beach. Usually, I like beaches. So, but with some rocky formation, some cover over my head, so I'm not shooting in direct sunlight. And kingfishers, pretty magic. If I can get one of those, eagles, of course. Love shooting birds of prey. Yeah, you'll get the seals. I got the 2 years ago mink. That was awesome. So I'd never seen a mink in my life, but got really good photos of a red-furred mink. So that was neat. Every now and then, like, stuff just happens, and it's just a matter of being patient. It's a game. It's a game of patience, like fishing.
Totally. I'm so curious about the time that you spend waiting for these nature pictures to show themselves, or waiting for birds to present themselves. Like, what is all that waiting time like? Because you're saying don't be on the phone, or else you're gonna possibly miss something.
That's
right?
when it happens.
Yeah. So how do you enjoy that time being out there by yourself? Because it seems like very solitary and not a lot happening for the majority of the time you're out there, I would presume, right?
Right. Yeah, you can look at it that way. For me, it's, I'll be out there the majority of the time and I'm not getting any photos. But there's always something happening around you. Whether you can see it and it's too far away from, I would love to have the camera lens that will zoom out far enough and give me these great images. But, it's such an expensive hobby. These guys that are showing these amazing shots of these birds in flight, like, these professionals who are using $10,000 lenses, like super expensive equipment they have. It's neither here nor there. What I'm getting at is that there's always something happening in front of you. Mm-hmm. And it may be out of range of your camera, or it may be in a way overly lit area that is not conducive to good photography. Or you could just be hearing stuff that you're not used to hearing. And that, for me, is as magical almost as getting the magic on the camera. You're still seeing, you're still witnessing it. You can't bring it home and say, here's the evidence that I witnessed it. But it's not a day lost for me. It's going out, coming back with one photo or no photos. It's still a good day in photography for me.
Well said. Yeah. Because sincerely, I totally hear you and understand you. We're spending so much time staring at screens, whether it be like laptops or phones, and we're giving so much attention to things going on in the 2-dimensional reality versus the 3-dimensional reality, where it's like real life, right? So you're there experiencing and witnessing what's going on in the real world and just being present with it. I think that's really, really great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to transition into what you are doing on Pender now that you've been here for it. How long exactly has it been? So when did you move here officially?
2 years living in the cabin and then here. And what I'm doing now is working at Woods. I started at Joe's place, as I said. From Joe's, the next wave of COVID came and he made layoffs. And anyway, I got introduced to a fella named Lino, and Lino's super funny, awesome guy. Anyway, he's a cabinet builder of sorts, and he lives 2 doors away from the cabin I was living at. And I don't remember how it started, but I went over, I introduced myself, we met, and we had a few beers, and then I had work. He offered me work, and I took it, and it was great. Working for him, I'm not a woodworker at all, but it was nice doing something different. And I guess it was like doing finishing work. They put these big window panes of white cedar and different types of woods, and I'd sand them, I'd coat them, I'd put this finishing wax and stuff on it, and made it look really, really pretty. And yeah, it was pretty cool. I did that for most of a year, and then it's weird how things happen. I had an opportunity to go back in the kitchen with somebody, and then at the same time, Woods kind of had me, Curtis from Woods kind of had me on the radar, and that happened at the same time. Nothing happens alone. Everything happens multiply, I find, in Pender. Anyway, so I met with Curtis and we hit it off. He's a really, really good guy. He does the type of cooking that inspires me to want to cook again. And he's all about flavor. And so I took the job with Woods, turned down the other job, and really tested my creativity again as a cook. So it's really taken me to be like a much better cook than I was before I got that job.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How come?
Because he's very flavor oriented, whereas my other chefs that I work with weren't. They were numbers, get it out. This is what you got to work with. Use it and get it out as fast as you can. And Curtis is like, I don't want you to just use anything. We're going to use the best ingredients. He's all about tasty ingredients is going to equal tasty food. He's all about that. So it's a matter of finding different ways to cook like a side of vegetables that can be boring, and we're making them exciting, So it's not easy cooking like that. You have to kind of think how it's like when I'm talking vegetables, like I'm doing on a prep day there, I've got about 8, sometimes 10 different vegetable sides that may be used in a pizza, may be used in a vegan bowl of some kind, anything. But when we're working, we've got all of these vegetables that are unique. It's not just like broccolini. It's broccolini that's cooked in a red wine and some smoked honey maybe and black sesame seeds or something. Like, I don't know. Like I'll pull out a bunch of ingredients on the fridge, just what I got to work with, and I'll come up with something creative.
And it's forcing you to be creative.
Yeah.
And
it's different every week. Every week it's different. And it's, the great thing about the relationship that I'm in with Matilda is we're using her produce. So I've got the best produce for the best end result. Like we're creating really yummy food because we're using really, really good food.
Right. And just so people know that Matilda runs Raven Rock Farms.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a chance to eat at Woods this summer, or actually this fall.
That's
and,
right.
It was so awesome. It was so good. Yeah.
That's right.
And yeah, it was kind of funny. My mom and my wife both got burgers, and he came over to explain what was inside the patty. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what's great about it. It's not just a burger patty. It's a very good ground chuck. And then I put 8 ingredients in the ground beef before I form it into patties. Like, it's great. The meatballs, again, that you had in the bolognese, like a lot of ingredients in there. And it's all about trial and error, going through it. This is like a little bit dry. You got to use the fatty meats with the lean meats, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I don't want this to wind up sounding like a commercial for Woods, but I mean, the food is amazing there. You do an incredible job. You seriously do, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We're just reaching the end of our time here in a little bit, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you want to talk about during this interview that you hadn't touched on yet, that you wanted to let the people of Pender and beyond know about yourself there, Johnny?
No, just like I'm love cooking. When I'm off, I like cooking, which is rare apparently in the industry. So when a lot of cooks are done their job, they'll come home and have pizza pockets. I'll come home and I'll cook up a stir fry, or today, actually, we had bolognese without the meatballs, but a bolognese sauce, pasta. I like cooking like that. Matilda and I was great. She'll do a big harvest, and I'll just cook up a big batch of something, and then we'll freeze it. You saw the freezers downstairs. That's a lot of harvest and a lot of batch cooking. So we have everything from pesto sauce to primavera to just simply roasted tomatoes, stocks, a lot of stocks. I use always making stocks and broths and whatnot. Yeah, so I like that. So no, nothing more to touch on really. I think I touched on a lot. I could go on in a lot more, but No, nothing that's jumping out and saying that this needs to be discussed.
All right. Well, there's one more thing to say, and that's the title of this podcast, and it's Welcome Home.
Ah, excellent. Nice. Chris, thanks for the time. Appreciate this.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to that. And thank you again to Johnny for doing that interview. That was really fun. I've been receiving a lot of good feedback lately about the podcast, and I want to thank you, the listener, for showing up to listen to these. And if you feel like sharing these podcasts so more people have an opportunity to hear them, I think that would be great. I know right now we're inundated with possible things to listen to and to watch, and I've heard from people on a number of occasions that they forget about the podcast until it pops up on a social media feed for them every now and then. So I'm trying to do what I can to remind people about the podcast, and if you would like to share this podcast with anybody, please feel free to do so. Again, if you'd like to purchase a calendar to help support this podcast, you can go to genevajacobsart.com, and there is a link for that in the description. While you're on the website, if you go to the link that says shop, it'll take you directly to where the calendars are, or if you just click on it, it should take you right there. I want to give a thanks to Ben McConkey for providing the theme music for this podcast. And again, thank you for listening. Until next time.